The following program is a SUTV student production. The views expressed are not necessarily those of Salisbury University, the University System of Maryland, its regents, administration, officers, employees, or representatives.
Thank you so much for joining us, Attorney General Gansler. We're glad to have you here. First, I want to ask you about your general vision for the state of Maryland. If elected governor, where do you want to take the state?
I grew up in Maryland. I have a lot of pride in our state, and I want to take it to a number of different ways. One is the economy and jobs. We're bleeding jobs. Our economy is horrible. Kids that are graduating from Salisbury, one of the great universities in our state, have a hard time getting jobs because so many of our jobs have left the state in terms of manufacturing, cybersecurity, life sciences. They're going to our neighboring states, Delaware, Pennsylvania, Virginia. So we need to bring back jobs to Maryland so we can build our tax base and do a number of the progressive things that I like to do as a Democrat. Another thing we need to do here in Maryland is to bridge our minority achievement gap. We have one of the better school systems in the country in, say, Montgomery County, Howard County, and some other parts of the state. Yet we also have the second biggest achievement gap in the whole country right here in Maryland. So if you go to some of the public schools in Prince George's County or Baltimore City, kids don't have equal access to an education, and we need to fix that. Public safety, I've been a prosecutor for 21 years. We need to address those issues in terms of crime. We have the 10th most violent state in the country and 4th in terms of homicide. So as somebody who worked in the Clinton administration with Eric Holder as a federal prosecutor, then was state's attorney for 8 years and now attorney general doing criminal prosecution as well, that's a very important issue to me. And finally, the environment. You know, the Chesapeake Bay is more of your generation, or your kids, you're gonna have kids someday, is your kids' generation as well, and we need to preserve it and actually bring it back and make it clean again.
I want to ask you about, when you talked about crime, I want to ask you about, there's been a recent dispute between the governor and Baltimore City Mayor Stephanie Rawlings-Blake over how to really curtail the crime in Baltimore City. Governor O'Malley seems to take more of a no-tolerance approach, whereas Stephanie Rawlings-Blake points to recent crime reduction numbers. If elected governor, where would you take this issue? Where would you stand on this very important issue?
Well, I've been a prosecutor, like I said, for 21 years. So I actually know what I'm doing in terms of public safety. And when I was state's attorney in Montgomery County, for example, we had almost 1 million people, yet we counted our murders every year in the teens. So what we were doing was working is very different than what they're doing in Baltimore City. So there's a lot of things that go into this in Baltimore City that we need to address. On that very narrow issue, clearly mass arrests are not the way to go for so many reasons. First of all, you're branding people so that they can't get a job in the future because they've just been arrested. Maybe they didn't really do anything. The other thing is if these people have done something, they're being arrested, and then they get out an hour or two later, it sends the exact wrong message, which is, hey, if they arrest me, I get to go home in an hour or two, so I'm gonna go do that or something worse. So I think we need to have targeted criminal enforcement, make sure we're actually putting the violent folks behind bars, the ones pushing drugs, the ones who have a drug addiction, we need to get them help, get them off of drugs. So there's a lot of different ways of looking at the problem, but I certainly am not in favor of mass arrests.
You talked about jobs earlier, and you just mentioned jobs again. The state estimates that the state of Maryland has lost 21,000 jobs due to sequestration. What would you do to bring some of these federal jobs back? And what would you do to bring jobs back to the state altogether as we stand at an unemployment rate pretty close to the national average?
Pretty close to the national average, but you go to places like Baltimore City where the 46% is the unemployment rate for adults. So we need to do a whole lot in terms of that. You know, we're very dependent on the federal government for jobs. We're also becoming increasingly dependent on gambling for our economic vitality in the future. And to me, that's very unfortunate. So we can do a number of things. We need to look at our tax structure so the businesses don't keep leaving Maryland and come back. So as we're sitting here talking, for example, every year the legislature meets in Annapolis and they confront almost $1 billion deficit, sometimes greater than $1 billion deficit, while right now in Virginia, they're putting $1 billion into a rainy day fund, just extra money that they have because they promote and bring jobs to their state. And so we need to do that as well. We need to open the door for businesses. We need to drop our corporate tax rate from 8.25% to 6% to match Virginia's, because if there's two products on the shelf and they're exactly the same, and one's $8.25 and the other one next to it's $6, people are going to keep grabbing that $6 product and leave the 8.25% on the shelf, and that's what's happening in Maryland. But at the same time, I'm the only statewide elected official that's in favor of raising the minimum wage. So we need to raise the minimum wage from $7.25 to $10, because if you work 40 hours a week right now at $7.25, you're not even at the federal poverty line if you have a family. So we need to raise that as well. So that's some of it. We need to raise our inheritance exemption from $1 million to $5 million so our retirees don't leave the state. We need to bring manufacturing back to the Eastern Shore, Western Maryland, and the state, because we used to have a lot of things made here in Maryland, and now nothing's made here. Very little is made here. And in terms of, and as part of that, there's something called tech transfer, places like Salisbury. We have the #1 research dollars that come into our state in the whole country, yet we're 39th in tech transfer. So the ideas are conceived here, but they're not produced here. So there's a whole lot we can do on the job side.
At the beginning of that answer, you talked about Maryland's economic dependence or the growing dependence on gambling. Something that you have proposed to decrease the gap in education is to use some of this money from casinos to fund pre-K for underprivileged students. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, that actually should have happened because that was in the original legislation, and then the guys that are in the administration now pulled it out, which is unfortunate, because what happens is, so one of the reasons why I have an achievement gap is because when the kids show up in kindergarten, the ones from underserved communities are already way behind and they never catch up. So what we want to do is extend pre-K from a half a day to a full day so that people can actually put their children there. If you're a single mother and you have a child, you can't put them in a half a day because you don't know what you're going to do in the other half a day. And they also want to, if they're there full day, they're going to learn and keep up and get the cognitive skills that they need to advance. The other piece of it is we want to have a program called Maryland Matters. It's a little bit like Teach for America, but at the pre-K stage, where Salisbury students and other college students, I did a very similar thing like this when I was in college. You go and work with kids before they get to pre-K and work with actually the parents and the children to help learn how to read and work on their cognitive skills so when they show up at school that they can be ahead.
I want to ask you about your plan for the high-speed rail that would run from Baltimore to Washington. What are the costs that would be involved? What would be the burden on the taxpayer? And what would the benefits be? Would they outweigh what it would cost?
Well, the benefits would be enormous. So right now, Baltimore used to have 1 million people. Baltimore City, now it's got 630,000. So people are leaving Baltimore, and we have the most congested area in the country for traffic in the DC-Baltimore area. So my proposal is to have high-speed rail from Baltimore City to DC. So instead of people living in Germantown or Gaithersburg or out in Prince George's County, where they have to have an hour and a half drive in, pollutes our environment, clogs our roads, you could have high-speed rail from Baltimore into Washington, make Baltimore a cool city like other cities in the country, and have people moving back in there where they have a 12 or 15 or 18-minute commute from Baltimore City to downtown DC, and vice versa. And so in terms of the cost, it depends on what we end up going with. There's the crown jewel would be the maglev, which the Japanese want to actually bring here as a pilot, and that would be great because they pay for most of it, the federal government pays for a lot of it, and the state would throw in some money as well. Or you get more Acela trains. Instead of having them come through once an hour, you have them come through with regularity every 15 minutes or so during the rush hours, so you can transport people back and forth, and of course expand on the weekends as well. So there's a lot of different ways of looking at it, but that's something we need to address.
You mentioned pollution again, and you talked about the environment. What would you do if elected governor to help our environment, particularly help the health of the Chesapeake Bay? We've heard about it getting better for years, or someone saying they're going to make it better for years, and we haven't really seen much progress.
No, because what most of these politicians do, you might as well just take the money and throw it in the middle of the bay and watch it sink to the bottom. And so, as the environmental attorney general, I've actually ran the environmental division for the entire country for all the 50 attorneys general before I became the president of the association. And we've done just a number of things on the environment here in Maryland in terms of the enforcement side. But one of the things we need to do is help our farmers, help our agricultural community, while helping the Bay reduce chicken litter runoff by building a power plant here in Maryland that'll take 500 million pounds of chicken manure and convert it into 55 megawatts to 60 megawatts of power. And we have the technology to do that. We just need to make it. We have to have the willpower to do it. And that'll help our farmers, that'll help preserve the poultry industry and our agricultural community so we don't have more sprawl and we can actually have more open space. but at the same time not have the nitrogen and phosphorus run off into the water. So this is a win-win-win proposal. That's just one of the ideas that we're talking about doing. But we've done a number of things. We've had the biggest enforcement action against, in terms of water, in terms of air, asbestos, in the history of our state, because of ramping up enforcement against actual polluters, which is what we've been doing in the Office of the Attorney General.
I want to move back to crime a bit. You talked about how Maryland still isn't where you'd want it to be as far as crime statistics. What have you done as Attorney General to better that, and what would we expect to see more if you were elected governor?
Well, I started the first gang unit in the history of the Attorney General's office, as I had done when I was state's attorney. I started the gang unit there. We got guns out of domestic violence, people that have protective orders of domestic violence. I had the Family Violence Council, and that was one of our measures there. I've been promoting domestic violence dockets. We've done a number of things on victim services. On the actual, all criminal appeals go to my office. So we've been doing the appellate work. And matter of fact, I personally argued a case in the Supreme Court to help police officers be able to talk to defendants and get confessions from them. We won that case 9-0. And more recently, we had a case involving DNA. And the taking of DNA from criminals, from suspects, to be able to solve cold cases, that was upheld by the Supreme Court, so we can continue to use DNA evidence nationally. So those are a couple of the things that we've done. I also have criminal enforcement in the environment, securities industry, white-collar crime, so we've done a number of things in that area. One of the interesting areas that I want to delve into in terms of when I am governor that nobody's really looked at here in Maryland is the idea of reentry. So as we sit here talking today, there's 23,000 plus people behind bars in Maryland, and another 144,000 people that are in the system. And we spend $32,000 a year to incarcerate somebody in jail. We spend about $1.3 billion on our criminal system to incarcerate and to supervise criminals. We have almost a 50% recidivism rate. That means when somebody gets out of jail, they're going to go back in within 3 years. Why? Because we don't give them a place to live, a support structure, or an opportunity to have a job. So we're actually we have a 10-point plan in terms of reentry that can help bring the number down from 46%, almost 50%, like other states that have done this, down to 22 or 26%, like Oregon and Michigan. Matter of fact, in Michigan, they've closed 20 correctional facilities by looking at this reentry issue and getting people, instead of paying $32,000 a year to house them in jail, get them back to their communities, get them back to their families, and make them tax-paying citizens so we can actually make money.
You talked a bit about your record and then what you would do as governor. You received some media attention for some comments that you made about Lieutenant Governor Brown's record or lack thereof. Tell us a bit about how your record matches up to his.
Yeah, so he's running on somebody else's record, and I'm running on my own record. So I've been a public servant now for 22 years, and I've developed what I believe to be a deep and robust record in a number of areas. You name it, we've done it. Seniors, children, families, environment, we already talked about. Obviously criminal law and so forth. And so I'm trying to get him to actually run on his record, which, and as I said at that particular meeting, which his campaign actually wiretapped, which was interesting since it was a felony wiretap. It broke our laws here in Maryland. And I said his record was thin. I thought I was being generous, and then versus our record and our vision for the state and where we want to take the state. And so far as we sit here and talk, his website is all about endorsements from entrenched political machine versus ours, which is all about ideas. What we want to do in terms of expanding domestic violence dockets, family justice centers, bringing manufacturing back to Maryland, HBCUs, increasing funding for those schools, the Minority Achievement Gap, which we've already talked about. So, I'm excited about running on my record versus his. I actually have a job, so we're going to continue to develop our record over the course of the campaign, and then our vision for the state of Maryland and our passion. I mean, I grew up in Maryland, so I understand what Maryland values are and Maryland pride and where we can be as a state. So I'm excited about running on that.
Let's talk about the campaign for a bit. You mentioned some of his endorsements. He has acquired some high-level Democratic endorsements in the state. How do you feel that you will be able to overcome these endorsements in the campaign and eventually secure the Democratic primary?
Well, those 7 or 8 people that have endorsed him, they're part of the entrenched political machine that benefit from keeping the status quo. But I can go knock on 7 or 8 doors on my street, and now we're tied. So I don't think people vote because some other politician tells them they should. You know, they're trying to handpick the candidate to be the next governor. They think this is a coronation. But in America, luckily, the people get to vote. So when I ran in 1998 for state's attorney in Montgomery County, I ran against 30 years of a political machine. I had every special interest. I had every entrenched politician. They were all on the other side, and we won pretty resoundingly. In the next election, both parties endorsed me, so I won re-election. And then when I ran for Attorney General, I had the exact same thing. It was the entrenched political establishment on one side, the people on the other, new ideas on the other, and we prevailed. So I fully anticipate that we'll prevail again because the people get to decide, not the entrenched politicians.
Finally, I just want to ask you, is there anything else you'd like to tell students at SU or anyone who could be watching?
I'm 50 years old and I still play lacrosse. I coach lacrosse. I started an intercity league in Baltimore for lacrosse. So I love the sport and just excited that here at SU, the women's team won the national championship. The men came up short, but they were in the championship. So the whole lacrosse world fears the Seagulls.
All right, Attorney General Gansler, thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining
I
us.
appreciate it.